Hi friends, Jenny at Clover and Violet here, and today we're going to be learning Raw Edge Applique. Raw Edge Applique is a fun, useful technique so that you can applique pretty much anything anywhere you want it. This is great not just for the flowers that I've designed to go with this case, but you could easily monogram something with your Raw Edge Applique or use a great fussy cut from a piece of fabric and then Raw Edge Applique that in place as well. All right, let's get started. So here are the supplies that I have. I have my printout from the pattern for the applique designs. I'm going to use Wonder Under, which is paper-backed fusible web. There's also ThermaWeb, I think it's called, and you just need to make sure that whatever one you're using is machine safe. So there is a fusible web that is a permanent fusible web that is not sewing machine safe. It will gum up your sewing machine needle. It's very thick. Even if you think maybe I'll sew through this, I can just say from experience, doesn't work well. So make sure that whatever fusible web you're using is paper backed and machine safe. So how I'm going to do this one is I'm going to pull out my fusible web, just place it on top of my designs, and then I'm just going to start tracing the patterns. I'm using a pen. I'm tracing on the paper side. I don't recommend that you use a pencil because it will, it can smear. A pencil can smear, and so can some gel pens. So as you trace, just check to make sure that your pen isn't going to smear the line when you iron it onto your fabric. So we're just going to trace all of these. All right, and here you can see how a few of them look. I won't bore you with me tracing all of them. And then your next step is just going to be to cut the designs out, not on the line. All right, just like so. And this is going to be your iron-on piece that we're going to then iron on to our scraps. So I'm going to go through, trace all of these, and cut them all out, and then I will be back with the next step. Okay, so I've cut out all of my shapes on the fusible paper. And so this is paper backed with fusible web. And so the side that you're going to iron onto your fabric is this rough side, and then the lined side is the side that we're going to cut out. So like I said before, you want to cut out kind of rough shapes of all of your pieces, because then we're going to trim them down to their exact size when they're already fused on the fabric. So I've got a pile of scraps right here, and I've got my nice hot iron. And I'm just going to make sure that I iron my piece before I put my transfer or my fusible shape on it, just so it's nice and smooth. Then I'm just going to lay my shape There, I'm going to cut this extra off. And then, so now I have my shape. It's on the wrong side of my fabric, and I am just going to fuse it on. And then I'll just let this cool, and I'm just going to continue fusing all the rest. And now I'm going to cut them out. I let them cool all the way because it really makes it easier to remove the backing when your pieces are nice and cool. So I'm cutting these out. You'll see my fabric scissors right here. So I'm cutting these out with just regular scissors because it is paper backed applique. And so these are some newer paper scissors, and they seem to be plenty sharp enough for this purpose. And this way I won't risk dulling my fabric scissors. And there we go. So I'm just going to continue this for all of the shapes and then we'll come back and I will show you how I'm going to fuse them on and then how I'm going to sew around them. Okay, so now we're going to apply our fusible pieces to our background. This background has already been backed with Shapeflex 101, and then I'm going to start off with removing the dots from the backing from the dots, and then fusing them onto the flowers. And if you feel like your fabric might be too thick, you can always go sew your circles down first. I tried it without and it worked just fine for me. So I'm just going to sew it all at once so that you can see it. But that is an option. Just remember, if you're going to fuse beforehand, that you need to leave the paper on the back of your main piece before when you iron onto it, otherwise you'd be fusing this in place. But it's easier to put the dots on first and then fuse. And so like I said, you can then go and sew this so that you won't have to sew through all the layers. Then we're going to start removing the backings of these, and if they don't just come right off, what I like to do is tear the paper just ever so slightly and very gently, and then when you do that, it really just peels off. This one is still warm from ironing on it just now. And although this makes your fabric fusible, it doesn't make it that much sturdier. So when I say tear, I really mean just like the tiniest little tear, because you can easily stretch or distort the side of your applique piece as well. That one was a little close to some short thread, so it started to tear. So I moved over to a different spot. And here's our last one. Alright, and now we have our sweet, fusible bouquet. And I'm just going to start arranging them on my background piece. And my goal is going to be to try to keep the layers from being completely doubled or more than 2 layers in any one spot. So if I feel like there's going to be 3 layers, then I will just move the pieces. So you can see that this green overlaps here, but they don't overlap underneath the leaf. And same with this blue, overlaps the green, but it doesn't overlap the green underneath this pink flower. And then I'll just keep on arranging these until I have an arrangement that I'm happy with. So let me just come back to you once I've got that all sorted out. Okay, so now I have my shapes carefully arranged just like I want them, and I am just going to fuse them in place. Now I am just going to place my iron on top of them and press down for several seconds, usually to the count of 8. Alright, and then when I have that finished, I'm going to take it over to my sewing machine, and I'm going to sew around each of these with black thread, and that's going to make my applique pieces just kind of pop off of the low volume fabric. So for our applique, I'm going to show you how to sew around these shapes with 3 different feet and basically 2 techniques. So this is just my standard sewing machine foot. It has a pretty good size hole in the middle, and I have set my sewing machine to 1.5 for the stitch length. So my normal stitch length is 2.5, so this is a shorter stitch. If your machine doesn't adjust stitch length by number, just choose a shorter stitch. And then I always like to start at the bottom of my applique, and I am only going to sew the top shape outline. So this shape here, this star that I'm going to start with, goes under the pink. I'm not going to sew the blue portion that's under the pink. I'm only going to sew the blue portion that shows that is also at the edge. So I'm going to start by taking a couple stitches forward and then backward, and then since my machine is taking such short stitches, I can turn it fairly easily. And my machine has an automatic where when I stop, I can choose that the needle is going to stay down and the presser foot raises a little bit. If that's not an option on your machine, just stop with your presser foot down or manually crank it until it's down, and then lift your foot up so that you can turn. This is kind of a slow process, but I think it's really worth it. And this is not staying exactly the same distance from the edges, and what I'm going to do is sew around it twice, and that gives me a little bit of freedom to adjust if I've gotten outside of the line at all or need to make it closer. And I'm going to clip this long tail before I get to it and accidentally sew it down. Okay. Okay, now this is the end of the shape, and so instead of cutting my thread, I'm just going to turn around and go back the other direction. Okay, so there's our star sewn, and you can see that my 2 lines do not match up all of the time, and I honestly think that that looks super cute, so I don't worry about trying to line them up, and that way it also gives me a lot of freedom if I've at all made any sort of mistakes on my sewing. Like you can see here, this one kind of started to jump off, and so I had to turn, but that looks much less like a sharp turn when I've curved the other one around. So this is just the regular foot, and then I'm going to show you next this with a clear open-toed foot, just so that you can see this one. And this is, I think, my preferred method right here, is to use this big foot that you can really see what you're doing. So let's do this on this green leaf. And I'll just say too that the nature of this being such a wide foot, I really have a lot more freedom to turn the applique design more than I did on the regular foot. But it's gonna work just great if you only have the regular foot, which is why I wanted to show you both. So I got a little overconfident and then I went off the edge right there, but other than that, you can see how well this foot worked for this design. Now this loopier one is going to be your hardest one of all, so that's why I placed this flower on top, so that you would have time to work on it. Or if you don't really like that one as well, or it looks too difficult, just make sure it's moved towards the bottom. The great thing about applique is you can arrange it any way you want. So now I want to show you, this is the free motion darning foot. So I actually have a setting on my machine for that. You may or may not, or sometimes you have to just adjust other things. So I put that setting on, and then I'm gonna lower my feed dogs as well, which on my machine is a sliding button. If you don't have this free motion floating is what it's called. If you don't have free motion floating or a darning foot, don't worry about it. But I wanted to show you this technique because it is a really fun one to practice, and if you do have that foot, it's yeah, it's really fun to work with. So I'm going to do this blue flower here. And as I press the sewing machine needle, the machine just sort of sews, but I can move the fabric any direction I want to. Okay, I'm going to stop real quick and cut my thread because it's in that foot, and so that's really distracting to the eye. All right. And so I really like the tidiness of the regular foot, but you can get really skilled with this darning foot, and you can write names or draw things. instead of just following outlines. I should probably practice more because I am not that skilled, but that's a really fun option, and this is a great way to start practicing this free motion floating or free motion with the darning foot. So I just switched to the free motion floating setting. If you don't have that setting on your machine, but you have a darning foot, there may be a way to adjust it. I would just check your sewing machine manual, and then I put my feed dogs down. And so then that is a free motion quilting that I can work on and I can go back. And so I'm just going to finish appliquing all of these, and then I'll come back when they're all done. Okay, so here we have our finished applique. I sewed with the free motion floating and the darning foot on all of the rest of these shapes. You can see that my lines are a little wobbly and wonky, but I really think that that gives a cute touch to the applique, and if you want your applique to be really tidy, you can just use the regular foot, go a little slower, or you could even use something like a blanket stitch if you prefer that sort of edging. But I like this style. I think it's fun and whimsical, and it goes well with these flowers that I've chosen. So I hope you enjoyed this new technique. You could put this on pretty much anything, a pouch, a tote, rearrange the flowers from the two different applique pieces, draw your own flowers, write words. It's just a technique with limitless opportunities, and so I hope that you enjoy this, that you use some applique in the future, and I can't wait to see what you put these flowers on.